Hey, good day, folks, and welcome back to Max Nave Horsemanship again. Today I want to talk about something that I was kind of inspired by, well, some recent events and a video series I've been watching, because recently I was watching a series of videos where a guy was starting a really tough horse, and, well, there was one thing that I didn't agree with in what he did that is, well, it's going to be the topic of this video, but I'm going to start off with, I'm going to talk a little bit about that video, because for the most part what the guy did, like 99%, totally I agree with, which is why I kept watching, because I enjoyed what he was doing, and how he did it and everything else was pretty much the way I would do it. Not exactly, but the general method was there. He took his time, he was patient, he was gentle, and in the end, he actually got on the horse. Now, it took several months to do that because he took his time and was gentle and all the good stuff that I think you should be doing anyhow. But that was a particularly difficult horse, and any one of you watching this video, I don't think you should be tackling a horse like that. And well, I'm going to explain why. I'll give you a little backstory on the horse. It was, we don't know everything about it because some of it's a little vague. Well, they kind of know where it came from, and some of this, they know a little bit. It starts off, it was a bucking bred horse. So its sole purpose in life was to buck. That's not a good horse to start with. And that particular one really hadn't been handled much at all, so it was very unhandled, feral. Well, you couldn't even touch that horse. Well, it was, maybe it didn't buck good enough. We don't know if it was even on the bucking circuit. We assume that maybe it was because it trailered reasonably well, didn't hesitate to go in and out of a trailer, although he had to work on that to improve how it did that, but that's not what the topic's about. The only thing, and that's why I'm not going to mention his name, because I don't want you hating on the guy for one thing, because the rest of what he did was excellent. So I'm not even going to mention his name. But I am going to talk about the one thing that I saw that was, I didn't agree with. He overcame that anyhow, but that was because the guy was particularly good and skilled, and he could. I don't think any of you would get away with it. It was a bucking bred horse, approximately 6-7 years old, something like that. Maybe it didn't buck good enough, I don't know. It was destined for slaughter. And a lady, kind-hearted lady, that ran as a rescue, she bought the horse to keep it from ending up as meat. And then brought it to this guy and said, can you do something with it? Because at that point, you couldn't even touch the horse. I mean, it was as feral. Well, according to the guy, he'd worked with Mustangs, and he didn't think he'd ever worked with a Mustang that was as bad as that horse. She was difficult, very, very difficult. I saw the entire series of videos and what the horse started out like, and yeah, she was not an easy horse. Like I say, you couldn't even touch the thing. It was that feral, that unhandled. And one of the main concerns of the rescue was they wanted the horse gentle enough that they could trim it, because she was in need of a trim, pretty bad. And, well, there's ways of doing it, but they're not ideal, and they cost a lot of money. And they thought the best thing to do was, because they wanted to eventually be able to rehome the horse to a good home, they wanted it gentle enough that you could pick up its feet and trim it. Well, I did see him pick up the front feet, and he eventually did manage to trim them, but she was a very kicky horse too, which made it a little more difficult and a little more dangerous to try picking up feet. So I kind of understand why he was having a problem in that area, but at the end, he actually got on that horse. He saddled that horse and got on it. Okay, so in the end, he was successful, but the one thing that I never did see was I never saw him picking up and trimming the back feet. I did see him pick up the front ones, so he was halfway there, but I never did see him pick up the back ones and trim them. And the last video before he rode the horse, he was still using his pony horse to keep himself up off the ground in case, so that she wouldn't kick him, because she was prone to kicking. If you got anywhere near the back end, she would lift a leg up and get ready to fire. Not a good thing. So, but because of his exceptional skills and he managed to successfully ride the horse anyhow. I don't think she was ready to be ridden. That's my first story. My second story is on the same theme. Now, I said, several times, and I've done several videos on the subject of the biggest mistake people make is getting in a hurry to ride. And getting on a horse that is not ready to be ridden is a very, very bad thing. Bad things can end up happening. I don't want bad things happening because the horse generally gets blamed for it and the human gets hurt, and it's not the way things should be. So anyhow, the next story, I didn't have any video of it, but I was there for it. So it's a first-hand experience thing I'm sharing with you. I was standing in an indoor arena, and this young lady was in there that was an aspiring trainer. She wanted to be a trainer, and she'd purchased this horse as a project horse, and she was on its back riding it in the indoor arena, and I was standing there talking to her for a minute, and I happened to look down and notice that horse really needed a trim. And she goes, and I did make comment of that, and she goes, "Oh yeah, but you can't trim him because he kicks." Well, I didn't say anything at the time, but my first thought was, if you cannot pick up the feet to trim that horse, why are you even on it? Because that means that the horse is not comfortable with things. It doesn't trust you enough to be able to pick up feet and trim them. And that's why I emphasize building a relationship and earning their trust early on and eventually picking up feet. And I think that should come before riding, because it really tells you what you're in for later on. Picking up feet and riding, they seem to be completely unrelated, but they're not. Because if the horse is too nervous and uncomfortable and untrusting to let you have its foot long enough to trim it, it's probably not a good idea to get on its back, because it could react. Because it's still worried and nervous. It's not comfortable with what's going on. And that's why I say there's a lot of stuff you can move it around a little bit to suit your needs or what's available at that particular time. And so it's not always like written in stone, the order you have to do things in. But there are certain things that I do believe absolutely have to be in a certain order. One thing leads to another, because if you haven't got it really good in one thing and you need that part to work good in order to do the other thing, well, you can't move on. And the same is true of riding. If you can't pick up the feet and trim them, the horse is probably a little too worried to be ridden. And like I said, I watched this young lady. She was riding this horse, and I looked down at the feet and saw they weren't trimmed. She tells me that it kicks, and I didn't say a word, but I'm thinking to myself, man, what are you doing on the horse if you can't trim it? Well, she took it outside to the round pen, and a very short time later, that same day, a matter of minutes later, and it took the bucking, which didn't surprise me one little bit, because if you can't pick up the feet, you shouldn't be riding, and the horse was going to react. It's just a matter of time before it blew up. I knew it was going to happen. So this is why I want to talk about doing things in order, and how it's important to have certain steps in place before you try riding, because if you don't have a good relationship with the horse, and if you haven't earned its trust to the point where you can pick up the feet and trim them, which has nothing to do with riding, but you're earning its trust. And if it'll trust you enough to pick up a foot and trim it, well, all four actually, then you can probably get on it. If you can't even pick up its feet, you probably shouldn't get on it. And that's the whole message behind this video, is take your time, get things right, do them in order, make sure one step is very, very good before you move on to another one, because they're all kind of interconnected, and some of them don't even seem like it, but they are. Like I said, picking up feet and trimming them doesn't even look like something that would have anything to do with riding, but it does. And it's very important for your own safety, well, particularly yours. And, if you've watched many of my videos, you notice I talk about safety a lot and things that you can do to avoid injury. And you'll notice I still got all my fingers and toes, and, I'm not limping around and injured, because I'm careful and I think ahead when I'm doing stuff. And that's why it's important to do this stuff, is if you take the correct steps, do things in the right order, you're going to stay safer. And that's what it's largely about, is being safe while you're around the horse so you don't get hurt and the horse doesn't get blamed. So do things in order and take your time, okay? Have a good day.